Charlie.
It's Charlie. Charlie.
They got rid of her.
Okay, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Charlie's the one that has cancer. Yes. Yes. That's right. See, I'm so thankful that people can remember stuff because I can't. The story of Elijah and the prophets of Baal, this is one of my favorite stories. It's kind of like it'd be awesome if it could be made into a movie. You know, they do so well with Thor and Iron Man and all that. This thing lends itself. It is a script already written. It is so exciting, and good guys and bad guys, and good guys win like nobody's business. But it's funny because of the list. There was a list of the top 100 favorite stories in the Bible. I would have never picked number one, and I would have never thought that Elijah and the prophets of Baal came in at number 42. What would you have picked as number one favorite story of the Bible? We won't spend any time on this, but what would you pick? Somebody just throw something out. I guess people think deeper theologically than I would. I would have said Christmas. I would have said the birth of Jesus. I might have said Noah's Ark after that. You know, I'm thinking of this. Number one was the crucifixion. I mean, it's critical to our salvation, but I just wouldn't think of it as my favorite Bible story. But nonetheless, we move on. So one of the things that we can't do is just jump right into the story without having a little background. So what I want to do first is go back all the way to 1 Kings. That's over in the left side of your Bible, towards the front. I want to look at 1 Kings, and I want to look at chapter 16. Just for a minute. So we're Kings talks about the listing of the kings of Israel and all of that. We get down to verse 29, and we meet this very strange character. In the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah, this is how, by the way, they dated the kings. Because at this point the kingdom was divided. You had Judah as one kingdom and Israel as the other kingdom. So Asa was the king of Judah, and Ahab, the son of Omri, began to reign over Israel. And Ahab, the son of Omri, reigned over Israel in Samaria 22 years. Here's the kicker, verse 30. And Ahab, the son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord, more than all who were before him. And as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, he took for his wife Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and went and served Baal and worshipped him. He erected an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he built in Samaria. And Ahab made an Asherah. Ahab did more. This is one of those astounding verses in the Bible. Ahab did more to provoke the Lord, the God of Israel, to anger than all the kings of Israel who were before him. In his days, Hiel of Bethel built Jericho. He laid its foundation at the cost of Abiram, his firstborn, and set up its gates at the cost of his youngest son, blah, 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 blah. So Ahab he wasn't just bad. He was worse than anybody who came before him. And he gets the notoriety of saying, and he particularly ticked off God. That is not something that you really probably want to be remembered for, I wouldn't imagine. But what did he do? How many sins, notable sins, do you pick up on in that passage? I mean, he did evil, and he provoked God like nobody else. As if it had been, and what it says, as if it had been a light thing, it means, and if that ain't bad enough, he went and married this Sidonian woman, Jezebel. Jezebel was, in a great sense, the wickedest woman who ever lived. And not only was she wicked and known from that time forward for her evil, the book of Revelation prophesies that evil, incarnation of evil at the end, will be named Jezebel. It's the Jezebel, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but nonetheless, she has a reputation. She was one of the things that connect her to the end of time is that as we get towards the end, there will be this syncretism of religion. You know what synchronize means, right? It means to put them together and make them mix. So syncretism is the blending of religious practices. Nobody probably does it better than Caribbean and Latin American Roman Catholics. The Catholic Church has always operated from the start. They operated under the premise that the best way to evangelize a nation and make them Christian was to go in and rather than necessarily removing all of their false worship, just put a Christian label on it. And in a lot of places it actually worked. In a lot of places it was fine. But in some places that were far flung and away from, away from Europe and that sort of thing, where there wasn't enough Christian influence, it led to abject heresy, like Haiti. Voodoo is its own religion, of course. It came from Africa. But if you were to study anything about actual voodoo, there are voodoo practitioners in Savannah, in Beaufort, all along the coast, and down in New Orleans, and places like that. Voodoo is alive and well in the United States, and even in South Carolina. You'll occasionally hear. I know when I was the chaplain of the police department down in Orangeburg, we would hear of things that were found that had to do with voodoo. But here's the thing: it connects Christian religion with voodoo, with a pagan religion, and blends it in such a way. Same thing is true with Central American stuff, that the voodoo gods might call them by Christian saint names, but they're still voodoo gods. The Cuban and Latin American version of that is something called Santeria, and you probably need to be mindful of it because it's alive and well here as well. Santeria is much similar, and they practice their religion by sacrificing animals and using blood in their rituals, but they still give their gods and idols Christian names. This practice is an abomination to God. This blending of religion. This is what Jezebel introduced into Israel. That, hey, it's okay to have a little bit of your God and a little bit of mine. There's room enough for everybody. Now, before you go and think that I'm picking on the voodoo practitioners and the Santeria practitioners, this happens in mainline, normative Protestant Christianity and in Roman Catholic Christianity in the United States all the time. It may not be by the introduction of idols in terms of statues and things like that, but the idols that culture brings in. Accept this thing, accept that thing. What was it called here a while back? The drag queen story hour at the libraries and things like that. And pretty soon that infiltrates the church, and now you have that going. All you have to do is punch that in on the internet, and you'll get 1,000 hits of different churches of different denominations who have this stuff. Those are idols. They have no place in God's church. They have no place in the one true faith. And yet, we've brought it in. It is no different. So bear that in mind. The people who bring that in and try to force that syncretism, or not force it maybe, but slip it in, they're Jezebel. Jezebel represents the seductive deceiver. Ahab, on the other hand, represents governmental authority. And by hook or crook, one of those two things, and sometimes both of them in collusion, are going to push their stuff off on people who, as P.T. Barnum said, a sucker is born every minute, and they know it. Because if they say the government says it's good, or the king wants you to do it, or Jezebel represents, she was a beautiful woman. So let's just say she represents movie stars, some pop culture celebrity who everybody just adores and says, I want you to do it too. So pretty soon you have the king and the pop star, doing commercials and everything in favor of this stuff. And pretty soon everybody's doing it. I put it that way because doesn't that sound a whole lot like what's going on in the country today? Yes?
What they're doing now that's similar to that is these offering up prayers to their ancestors and angels and incense and asking the ancestors to guide them, and I think that's that's really taken off in the younger culture now. That's really the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, any of these things, anything that says you can still be a Christian and do this thing is wrong. If there is a caveat to it, if there is a little addendum that says you can still be a Christian, but you can add this, never trust somebody who tells you that, because you can't add anything to Christianity. You just can't do it. So you have Ahab, you have Jezebel. By the way, I said, what all did he do? He erected. So the first person sucked in was Ahab. He was the first person that Jezebel seduced and deceived. And he was the main one, obviously, because he had the authority. Then what did he do? He erected an altar to Baal, and he made an Asherah pole. I'll explain that in just a minute. But I want to say, as to the number one thing on your list, wicked leaders always lead people into more wickedness. It is the nature of the beast, pardon the pun. I've got a book that I'm reading, and gee, Nanette. what's it called? I was just going to try to tell you. Nicholas, George, and Wilhelm, or Nicholas, Wilhelm, and George, something like that. The Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany, and King George of England were all first cousins. Queen Victoria was their grandmother. Those three men could have ended World War I before it started. They could have stopped communism, and they could have also prevented World War II from ever happening. But they didn't, because two of the three were only concerned with themselves, either keeping their throne and their power or advancing their throne. I'm going to let you guess which two they were. The German Kaiser, the English king, or the Russian Tsar. Which of the two were the bad ones? You would think the German and the Russian. You're right with the German, but it was the English one that was the rotten one. Kaiser Wilhelm was jealous. He was crippled, and he was jealous because he was like, was it Tommy and Dick Smothers? And one of them would always say, Mama always did like you better. He knew that he was not Queen Victoria's favorite grandson, and he was resentful. And he also knew that Germany, when compared to England and Russia, was not as strong and as powerful. So he had delusions of grandeur. He was in it for himself, and he made some really bad decisions. I'll get back to that. Tsar Nicholas was a Christian leader in Russia who was being opposed by this small but powerful group of Bolsheviks, the original communists. And he asked his cousins for help, the Germans and the English, and they both said no. And they both said, fend for yourself. England didn't want to get involved in Russian affairs, not for political reasons of English sovereignty, but because George didn't want to expend the money. And he was afraid if he left to go to Russia, he might lose some power. And even when Nicholas asked him to come, let him and his family come to England for exile for a while till it all boiled over in Russia, George wouldn't let him. And the communists killed the royal family in Russia, executed them. And the communists took over. Wilhelm sided with the Axis powers and started World War I. And England was dragged right into it. And it's all been downhill ever since that day. But they could have stopped it all. But my point is that Wilhelm, not the best leader in the world, made bad decisions that led his country to make bad decisions. When the communists took power and were truly wicked in Russia, the people became even worse because they lived under oppression and all of that. So wicked leaders lead people into more wickedness. Those are some ways. Look at, just look at any wicked nation. But also, I love this other notion that wicked leaders can be punishment from God. John Calvin said that the way God punishes a nation is to give them wicked rulers. I really think that we are under God's judgment now as a country, and it may extend because we don't, as a nation, show many signs of turning back to God. But God punishes and brings judgment on a nation by giving them wicked rulers. This was both a test for Israel and a judgment upon Israel. Israel was failing the test. They were turning away from God. So God gave them Ahab and Jezebel. Now, beyond that, let's move over to 1 Kings. Oops. 2 Kings. 1 Kings 17. And we have Elijah who enters the scene, and it says, "Now Elijah the Tishbite said to Ahab, As the Lord the God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years, except by my word." Now, this was a punishment from God, that there would be no rain. God has a lot of different ways that He can use that are at His disposal to bring punishment and judgment on a people. Sometimes it gets a little bit more specific. Sometimes it's personal, and sometimes it's regional, even national and beyond. And one of these things was this lack of rain. 1 Kings 18:1 says, "After a long time, in the 3rd year of the drought, the word of the Lord came to Elijah, Go and present yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the face of the earth." James chapter 5, verse 17 says, "Elijah was a man with a nature like ours, and he prayed fervently that it might not rain. And for 3 years and 6 months it did not rain on the earth." Luke 4:25. "I tell you the truth, that there were many widows," this is Jesus, "in Israel in the time of Elijah, when the sky was shut for 3.5 years, and the great famine swept all over the land." And then Acts chapter 14, verse 5 makes a reference to it when it says, "Why are you doing this? We are only men, humans like you. We're bringing you good news that you should turn from these worthless things to the living God, who made heaven and earth and the sea and everything in them." So, the reference in Acts chapter 14, to turn from these things, is to prevent the same kind of judgment, punishment that happened in Israel all those years before, because the people didn't turn away from their idols. And so God brought judgment upon them. And the judgment in this case was the form of no rain. Now, let's before we get to the story itself, I do want to look at two more players in this thing, and that is Baal and Asherah. So, Baal is a generic word that means Lord. It's not so much a personal name of this deity, but it was the common name of this Canaanite idol. He was the fertility god. He was associated with thunderstorms, rain, and this kind of thing. One of the beliefs was that during the dry season, which always happened, Baal was trapped in the underworld. Now, this is really interesting. Some inescapable place that only their sacrifices could free him from. Some commentators even say he was trapped in a place like hell. I don't know so much about that. This is an interesting thing because of the nature of human sacrifices. Sometimes, in this case, children They sacrificed their children to Baal in order to get him to free him so that he could do for them the stuff that they wanted. You remember that Jesus was called, you remember he was called Beelzebub? They said he, this is just a different spelling of this. Lord of the dung heap, really. It means kind of Lord of the flies, but the image is, if you ever anybody ever had the privilege of walking through a cow pasture? If you walk through a cow pasture, you invariably are going to come on the leftovers of the cow's lunch somewhere, and there will be, they're not flocks, whatever, bunches of flies, swarms of flies. Yeah, that's what they are. And this was not a good name that they were calling Jesus. Number one, because it represented a pagan deity, but the other because it represented dung. Really, nonetheless, Asherah was. This is where the story gets really gross. Asherah is a female deity, Baal's lover and queen. But the oddest part, I don't even know why people would make stuff up like this, but the oddest part was she was also Baal's mother. I mean, you'd think you'd make something up better than that, but anyway, she was the female counterpart of Baal, and she had these poles that were erected that people would worship at and also make sacrifices to. She was a fertility goddess. They should have been worshipped or would have been worshipped together in different ways, though, but a lot of times with the sacrifices. Ahab erected both altars to Baal and Asherah poles to her. So he was just, saying, well, we can blend this in. It's a national thing. We'll just, for the sake of unity, we'll have all of this. And actually, he was obviously a true believer by this time. But there were people, obviously, who were not, and they were sucked in to this pagan false belief system. And so we turn from there to Exodus chapter 20, and we hear exactly what the Lord says about Baal and Asherah. Chapter 20, verse 1. And the Lord God spoke these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that's on the earth beneath, or that's on the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and the fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. God is a jealous God. He is jealous for our love and for our attention, and He will not share it with anything else. A couple of things I need to say in addition to what I just said about Baal and Asherah. They are idols. And though people may have carved them or made golden statues of them or what have you, incidentally, Baal and Asherah are often depicted as cows, bulls, and he a bull, she a cow. One of the reasons to go back to Exodus chapter 20 is that the Ten Commandments came right after the business of the golden calf. Now, I'm not suggesting that the two things are necessarily connected, but they are in one sense connected, because this notion of cattle being symbols of fertility, and so we got to worship them, was rampant from the time of Moses to the time of Elijah and beyond. So there was that. But there's something else to remember about these idols. And this goes for the voodoo idols, the Santeria idols, or the Hindu idols, the little statues of fat, happy Buddha that you see everywhere. Those are not cutesy little things, and those are not empty. How do I say it? They're not just pieces of wood or stone or metal. What's behind them? Every false god has behind it a demon. This is biblical Christianity. Everything that's false, Jesus said it himself, comes from the father of lies, who is the devil. Lying is his nature, and that is what he's going to do. He came to deceive. In fact, he is called the deceiver of the world. And so the deception that he gives is, one of the ways he deceives, is not only by making sin look, appetizing or inviting, but he also does it by making people think that it's okay to have these, idols in their homes or what have you, and to to believe that there's nothing to them, even if they have them, even if they know that it's a pagan idol or what have you. It really doesn't mean anything. Well, yes, it does. There is a demon behind it. I think Billy Graham once said something that was backed up recently by I can't think of his first name, but he's an exorcist, Roman Catholic exorcist. His name is Rippinger, last name. Billy Graham once said that you need to go through your house and you need to take out any books or movies or anything like that that are overtly or even subtly demonic, or that's like some of these horror movies. I'm not talking about like the old black and white Frankenstein and the Mummy and all that kind of stuff, which is children's stuff compared to what's out there now. But stuff that really has satanic overtures in it and things like that. Take them out, because they can be portals. Rippinger said the same thing very recently, that these could be portals or doorways or entryways through which the demonic can actively enter into a home or a place of business or a church, or can oppress this place so that nothing good goes on there or nothing beneficial. I think that from the Protestant side and the Catholic side of Christianity, a Baptist and a Catholic on both ends of the bookshelf, I think that what they say is absolutely true. That idols of any kind are entryways for the demonic, because behind every idol, even if we think it's a cute little trinket we bought on our trip to Japan, it's still a thing that God abhors. If you go down to the gas station, I won't name it since we're on video. You go to the gas station right down here, And if you go up to the counter and pay for something, there is a little fat elephant sitting up on the shelf with incense burning in his lap. And that's Ganesh. It's I believe it's the god of prosperity among the Hindus. Behind Ganesh, a cute little elephant, is an ugly little demon. I served at a church prior to this, and I walked into a Sunday school class one day trying to find something, and I was astounded that there on the main table that was sort of like a, I don't know, like that table back there, where you would have candles or something like that. It's a little fat Buddha sitting right there on the table. No cross, but there's a little fat Buddha sitting in there. Buddha didn't last long, and he was he took missing, as you might say. But anyway, those kind of things are not good. God despises idolatry. Another thing, what Ahab and Jezebel did was unacceptable. Pluralism in every way is unacceptable. God does not tolerate a little bit of. Think of it this way. This is the best way to do it. How many people in here? I'm going to ask two different questions, and probably it should hit everybody. How many people in here know how to cook pancakes? Okay, so I'll talk to you first. So let's say you're going to make a bunch of pancakes. Let's say you put a half a box of pancake mix in a bowl, but you put 3 gallons of milk in the bowl, and you mix it up. What you gonna get? Nothing. You gonna get it? Won't. It'll be awesome. How many of you in here drive and get gas at this gas station? Let's say you went down to the gas station and you said, I'm going to change this up. I'm going to put $5 of gas in the car, $10 of diesel fuel, and the rest of it kerosene. Won't work. This is how we think we can do with God. We go to the filling station and we say, let me get $3 of God and $17 of Ganesh, or whatever else it is. It won't work that way. God will not allow it. You cannot have the two things mixed. This is called pluralism. This is the heresy that Pope Francis, that I referred to this morning, that Francis said this past Thursday in Singapore. It does not work because it is not biblical and it is not something God allows. So the story, of course, Elijah finally has enough. Let me get to it. And so, let me find it here. Elijah met with Ahab privately. And I think if I ever get a personalized car tag, of course it ain't big enough to say this, but Ahab greeted Elijah with this title. He said, something like, what are you doing here, you troubler of Israel? Being called the troubler of something is probably a good thing when it comes to if you're doing it for God's sake. And Elijah basically says, I haven't troubled Israel. You're the one that's troubled Israel because you've abandoned the faith. You have rejected the God of your fathers. And you've embraced all this other stuff. And then, so Elijah challenges Baal to basically a good old-fashioned Matt Dillon kind of showdown. But instead of Main Street at high noon with, 6 guns, he says, bring all the prophets of Baal and all the prophets of Asherah, and let's go up to Mount Carmel and have all the people of Israel there, because I want them to see. I want them to see who is the real God. And so it all happens. They go up to Mount Carmel, and they build this altar. And I won't say Isaiah. Elijah instructs them exactly how to build the altar. And they put the meat on the altar and everything. And then he tells them about, now wet it. Now dig a trench around it. And pour so much water on it that the trench fills up. And now what we're going to do is have this showdown. And we're going to call on our gods. And we're going to ask them to send fire down from heaven. And whoever does it will send fire down, and it will consume what's there, and that obviously will be the winner. And before it happened, Elijah looked at all of the people of Israel who gathered there on the mountain that day, and he said, how long will you falter between 2 opinions? If God is God, follow him. If Baal is God, then follow him. Basically, he was saying, you got to fish or cut bait. You got to pick a side. You can't have it both ways. Goes back to what I said. Pluralism is unacceptable to God. Syncretism is unacceptable to God. Syncretism is the mixing of 2 things. Pluralism is sort of the mixing of more than 2 things. So he, by the way, in something else I just thought of. The word he uses, how long will you falter between 2 opinions? Some of your translations will say waver. But the Hebrew actually says falter, and it means to walk around like a crippled person. In other words, he was saying, you're not only dilly-dallying in this, but you're crippled. You're spiritually lame because you can't pick one and go with it, and you can't pick the right one. So then he said, all right, let's do it. Let's do this thing. And so he says to the prophets of Baal, you people go first. They called on their God. Nothing happened. They called on their God for a while. And they danced around and they yelled and they screamed. Nothing was happening. Then they began to cut themselves so that, their God would, maybe take note of that and come down and help them. And all this time, Elijah is taunting them. He's making fun of them. One of the best things that he says that doesn't directly translate is, I think there's one version, a modern version of the Bible that does it well. One says maybe he's sleeping. The one that does it well kind of says maybe he's indisposed. That's a polite way of saying what he said in Hebrew is this. Maybe your God is in the John. Basically, he uses a very colloquial word. He doesn't even say in the toilet. He says something that's the equivalent of saying he's in the John, or if you're British, maybe in the loo, or something like that. But he's just, you can almost see him just kind of laughing and smirking at him because there's nothing going on. there is not a peep, and now it's his turn, and because nothing has happened. Again, Elijah had the people to eliminate any possibility that this was a trick. He had people pour more water on everything and drown all the wood, and he did it so that when the fire came down, nobody would think that there was some sort of trick. Isaiah said a prayer. I think the prayer in English is 62, 63 words long. And he didn't have to say much. He didn't have to go into all this whirling dervish kind of stuff because he knew God would answer him. Because this is the thing that God wanted to prove. It was a great display of God's power. Because fire came down and it lapped up everything that there was to lap up. And then, of course, at the end, Isaiah had the people of Israel take those prophets, those false prophets, down to the river and kill them all. A lot of people say, well, that's just gruesome. It might be. But it certainly eliminated the possibility of more poison to God's people. And it also proves this. It proves that all religions are not equal. They are not equal at all. There is not any that is equal to Christianity. The rest of them are equal in the sense that they're equally wrong. But in God's eyes, there is only one faith, and that's the one He has given to us. The faith we read in Jude that was once delivered to the saints. Contrary to what the Pope said, every path does not lead to God. All of those paths are broad and easy, and they lead to destruction. There's only one path, and it's very, very narrow, very difficult, and it is the way of Jesus. And that is the only way that leads to heaven. God will not tolerate idolatry. Another thing to remember is that these false prophets, these priests of Baal and Asherah who danced around and screamed and yelled and were very emotional and everything, it just goes to prove you that emotion and passion and zeal for their God does not mean that they are right. They're not signs of true salvation, even if they're the most sincere people on the planet. Have you ever met a Mormon, one of those kids that ride the bicycles, Mormon missionaries? They are the nicest people in the world. They are as sincere as you can imagine. They truly believe what they're telling you. But I'll say that. I'll say it anyway. There are people, there are people right now who truly believe Joe Biden is a great president. Huh? Oh, well, yeah. Fishing. But people believe anything, but just because they believe it does not make it so. Another thing to listen to understand. You know, we're big on faith. You know, by grace have you been saved through faith. But faith in the wrong thing is not enough. You know, I like to watch those old videos, those old films of the Wright brothers, and all the times that they tried to make some contraption fly. By the way, you know Orville and Wilbur's daddy was a Methodist bishop, didn't you? Yeah. And by the way, he told them they were stupid. He said God didn't intend people to fly. And he probably was right, but nonetheless, Think about all the times they tried and they failed. They had faith that this thing was going to work, and they didn't. At least they didn't strap, like you see in those old movies, they didn't strap, feathers to their wings and jump off a cliff. But people have faith in that kind of stuff. But is faith misplaced? Faith in the wrong God will get you nothing. So that's another thing. There is only one true saving faith. And it's the faith that began when God made the promise to Adam and Eve in Genesis, and I keep going back to it, I mentioned it this morning, Genesis chapter 3:15. I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and hers. You will strike his heel, but he will crush your head. That is the first prophecy of the Messiah, of Jesus. That is the true saving faith. That's how Noah was saved. That's how Moses was saved. That's how Abraham was saved. That's how Isaac and Jacob was saved, and how Elijah was saved, and Enoch and all the other people. Not for keeping Old Testament law, but for believing in the promise of the Messiah who was coming. Read the book of Hebrews. It talks about all these saints of the Old Testament. How were they saved? They were saved by faith in the only one who could save them, the coming Messiah. They didn't know him. What was the prophecy of Balaam? I see him, but not now. He is far off. Yeah, he was far off. He wasn't there yet, but he was still coming. Faith in the one who was coming. There's only one true saving faith. God is a jealous God. He says as much in the Old Testament. And the only thing he wants from us is total devotion. Let's go back to the Mormons a minute. Not to be ugly or anything, but this whole notion of polygamy just is just unbelievable to me. I mean, my grandmother got divorced from my grandfather, who Mike's side of the family. But she got divorced, and I asked Grandma one time, I said, "You ever gonna get married again?" She said, "No, honey, I had one husband and that was enough." And that's there was probably some wisdom in that, but I think one spouse is enough to keep us busy, good or bad. I can't imagine having more than that. I mean, I don't even want to. I don't. There's not enough hours in the day for one, let alone for two or a bunch. Listen, I say that kind of in jest, because the whole relationship to marriage, human marriage, and our relationship with God is real, and it's spelled out. That's why the word in the Old Testament for adultery, you have to be careful how you read it, because sometimes it means cheating on a spouse, but probably more times than not, it means cheating on God. It's why the marriage relationship is a covenant relationship, and our relationship with God is called a covenant relationship. It's based on promises. It's hard to keep the most important covenant promises. It's hard to keep them with one person, let alone with more than one. And so like my grandmother, if you had a bad one, you don't want to run the risk of getting another one that might be equally bad. But it's hard work, in other words. It's a lifetime of work. It's the ultimate commitment. This is what God says. And obviously, every marriage is not going to be like that, because sometimes, in my experience, I've gone into marriages with people to marry them that I knew were not going to work from the get-go, or I just had this feeling. Maybe shouldn't have even gone through with it, but I did. because they at least said all the right things. But I had this notion that they just weren't being honest, and in the end, it didn't. It didn't pan out. Although I married one of my cousins one time, and when that one didn't work out, and she was going to get married again, God love her because she's been married to this guy for a long time. He's great. He's awesome. But one of the other cousins said, "You going to get Mike to do the wedding?" And she said, "No, I'm not getting Mike because the first one he didn't take." Like it was my fault. I didn't have anything to do with it. But there's the acknowledgement is that sometimes we're not going to get into the marriage thing, but sometimes marriages just aren't going to work for a variety of reasons, and this is why we're so gracious. The Bible, Jesus is gracious in this idea of divorce. But I'm off the subject. The topic, the last thing to say is that what God wants, if we're supposed to be committed to a spouse, and only one spouse, and anything less than that is adultery. God says it goes double or triple or however many times over for me. I want your ultimate commitment, your ultimate allegiance, and I will not have you messing around with anybody else. It cannot work that way, and I will not allow it. If you want to do that, then you do it to your eternal peril. So, this is the final lesson of the story of Elijah and the prophets of Baal. And I guess the example that goes with that is what ended up happening to the prophets of Asherah and Baal. They were not committed to God. They were not going to be committed to God. They were wholly committed to these false gods, these demonic gods. And so God punished them by ending their lives. He is a jealous God. I'm not sure that it happens that dramatically today, but I probably could tell you stories of how people who have thought they could have $3 worth of God and $5 worth of Buddha and all this other stuff have come to all sorts of chaos and ruin and trouble because God just simply will not honor and will not prosper that kind of behavior. I made it out of here quicker than I thought I was. I can't believe it. I had actually time for questions. But I wanted to make sure that I got through everything before the herd of children came rushing us tonight. I'm actually astounded that I just looked up and saw that I have 15 minutes left that I could have spent talking about something. Anybody have any questions? Anything that I left out that you want to hear about? Or I didn't elaborate much? Yes, sir.
This might be an additional lesson or something, but after that, the statement about the wind and the earthquake and the fire, and God was not in those things, but there was a quiet voice. Is that another sermon, or what does all that mean?
That's another. Well, let's go to it. So let me go over is in the right book.
Just briefly.
Yeah, I will. I just got to get to I was in Exodus. No wonder I couldn't find it. I got to go back to
But that was Elijah, right?
to King, yes. So here is here's this interesting story about this man Elijah, and it's fascinating because so let's get out of 18 and what just happened on the mountain, and Ahab the king went back and told Jezebel what had happened, all that Elijah had done, and how he killed all the prophets with the sword. And Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, "So may the gods do to me and more also if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." In other words, I'm going to get you by this time tomorrow. Then Elijah was afraid. And this is just baffling to me. How this man, I mean, this is an aside that Nathan didn't ask for, but how this man who just stood up before all those people who could have killed him if they wanted to, and didn't, now is scared of this woman and what she's going to do. Ran for his life, came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, the other kingdom, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a tree. And he asked that he might die, saying, "It is enough now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers." And he lay down and he slept under the tree. And behold, an angel touched him and said to him, "Arise and eat." And he looked, and behold, there was at his head a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. And he ate and drank and lay down again. The angel of the Lord came again a second time and touched him and says, "Arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you." And he rose and he ate and drank and went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mount of God. There he came to a cave and lodged in it. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And he says, "I've been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even only I, am left, and they seek my life and take it away." And he said, Get out and stand on the mount before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by. And a great and strong wind tore the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a low whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came a voice to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He said, "I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, blah, 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 and I am the only one that's left. And now they want to kill me." And the Lord said, "Go and return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus," etc., etc., etc. And here is where he's put on to Elisha, and Elisha becomes his successor. So what this is about is takes us back a little bit to Baal and Asherah. Baal was god of storms, thunderstorms, and things like that. Asherah was one of the things she was supposed to control was the earth. And so it's kind of similar to what we talked about last week with the gods of Egypt, and how the plagues were counters and were actually plagues that exposed the false gods of Egypt. This is one of those things as well. People believed that their gods control the weather and could be found in the weather and things like that. And it's one thing to say God is omnipresent, He is everywhere, but it's a different thing entirely to say that God resides in a thunderstorm, or God resides in a water spout, or a tidal wave, or something like that. And I think the meaning of the passage that God was not in the wind, and God was not in the storm, and God was not in the earthquake was to show, in one sense, that Baal and Asherah, who controlled storms and the earth, things like that, in their belief, were not real gods, but also that God Himself is not to be found in these things. God instead is to be found in when He speaks to us, in a still small voice, a whispering voice. And I think that's a foreshadowing of Scripture. We don't go outside and throw bones on the ground and read them, or throw tea leaves in a pot and read them, or we don't look and try to make sense out of the different clouds and say, oh, God is saying this and God is saying that, or we don't listen for X number of rumbles of thunder, or however it is the pagans do. God speaks to us quietly. I think Max Lucado said that in a more poetic way, that in the hustle and bustle of the busyness of Bethlehem, with all the people coming and going and registering for Caesar's tax, God spoke to the world. But He didn't speak over a loudspeaker. He didn't speak in any kind of amplified way. He spoke in the tiny cry of a baby. And so, and there's a connection to that. Jesus is the Word made flesh. The Bible is the Word written. And so I think what Nathan brings up is that God was saying to Elijah and to us, don't look for me in terms of trying to figure me out, understand me. Don't look for me in these things of nature. I made this. You can, through this idea of common or general grace, people can know that there is a God because of these, but don't look for me in these things. In other words, look at a beautiful sunset. You can see the handiwork of God. The psalmist says, the heavens declare the handiwork of God. You can see God there. You can see God at work there. But God is not in the sunset. And He certainly doesn't speak to us through a sunset, no matter how beautiful it is. And by speak to us, I don't mean this, kind of symbolic way. I mean, He doesn't speak to us in terms of showing us and telling us about Himself and teaching us. God is to only be found in a still small voice, the Word. This unobtrusive book. The rest of, if you go think about down in Central America and all of the great Mayan ruins that they have found, Teotihuacan and all these other places, and how they would sacrifice people, and a lot of times they would wait till the thunderstorms came up, or they would sacrifice people in volcanoes in different places, and it would be this, God was resident in this thing, and so they had to know. He tells Elijah, God is not in the storm. God is in the still small voice. So let the voice, it's a good way to end that. Let the still small voice of God speak to you every time you open the Bible and read it, because He will. The Word of God is alive, it is sharper than any two-edged sword. It's meant to build us up and strengthen us. And it will not, I guarantee you, because it says so itself, if you read the Word of God and listen for His voice, He will speak to you every time. And I can certainly, as somebody who teaches this stuff and loves digging into it, I can tell you that if I threw all of these notes away and studied a second time for next week, this same thing, I would come up with something different to tell you. Not because what I told you today is wrong, I hope, certainly not, but because the story is so rich, you can read it 1,000 times and come up with something new and meaningful every time you do, because that's how deep and how true the Word of God is. And if you go into it expecting and desiring to hear Him speak, He will. And He will tell you what He wants you to know. And that's the beauty of it. And that's the beauty. Thank you for bringing that up. That was a great way to end this. That God is in His Word. And that's where we can find it. Next week, we're going to look at Ezekiel and the valley of the dry bones, and that's going to be a good one. As we get closer, probably at least 1 or 2 times, the youth are going to come in here with us. I think the time we get closest to Halloween, because I'm going to talk about some of the stuff that not relates necessarily, not about Halloween itself so much as things in the Bible that they need to hear, and we probably do too, the things that are related to ghosts and witches and that sort of thing, and witchcraft, because the Bible has plenty to say about that. We're going to talk about one of the, I think probably the Sunday that we do the blessing of the animals. We're going to talk about all the different animals in the Bible that God used and that have significant meaning and purpose. And the question of will my dog be in heaven? Maybe the week before that, the Sunday of the church, the holy day in the church is called St. Michael and All Angels. And so probably on that day we'll talk about angels, good angels and bad angels. Probably, who is Michael and Gabriel and all of that, but also who is Lucifer and how did he become Satan, and things like that. So we got a good little study coming up. As we get into November, I think we're going to be looking at stuff that relates to Christmas, so that we can have a little bit more in-depth look at the nativity and stuff that surrounds the prophecies of the coming of Jesus and all of that. So, thank y'all so much. Let's not forget about, tell your friends about next Sunday over at Vaughn's, and we'll send something out probably tomorrow.